So today's video is all about water disasters and what you can do to protect yourselves against them. Oh, nuts! Right? Like older homes have got a lot of problems with the building code and how they are put together, and you're really susceptible to multiple different variations of problems. Yep, you guessed it, you got a pinhole. The newer the house, the less variations you have, but it doesn't matter. They don't make brand new houses today to protect you from every single event. And the copper fitting blew off. And so the water's firing out, so I had to quit with my hand. And now, I'm not gonna suggest you do this. So, what we're gonna talk about today is all the different problems you're gonna run into, how to mitigate them, how to protect yourself from having them in the first place. No matter how old or how new your house is, they've all got weak spots. That's what we're gonna cover today. We're gonna help you protect your house so that you don't have to get the insurance company out to fix your flood. As a bonus in this video, I set up a demonstration outside. I'm going to show you 3 ways that you can do emergency repairs on a busted water line, okay? So that's near the end of this presentation, but don't just jump ahead to watch it because there's a lot of really good information that'll save your bacon. Remember, insurance companies work on the 3 strikes and you're out rule. So if you have 3 major problems that you need insurance coverage for, you're not insurable anymore. All right, so let's talk about the obvious. Bulk water. Water is our enemy when it comes to homes. Generally speaking, we need it to survive, but we need to keep it under control. We need to manage it when it comes to our construction because the building materials we use. And if we don't manage it, it becomes a serious problem. Water can cause all kinds of issues as far as like corrosion and destruction, and it can cause mold, which is a really big concern in homes. So let's talk about all the different problems that you can run into and how you can mitigate the problem, which is basically protect you from having it in the first place. So before we get started in this, let's get outside the house. Let's talk about water, where it comes from. We've got 2 sources, and one of them is rain, and one of them is the fact that the city brings it to your house on purpose. So when it comes to rain, we have a house which got a roof and we have water diversion system. And basically the water falls and it goes down the roof. It's got gutters. We like to have drainage and we like to have slope away from the building to move water away from the house. And depending on your type of foundation, you really want to manage that really effectively. So if you have a basement, you don't want water sitting and going back towards your foundation because then it comes down the wall and you get hydrostatic pressure building up with the water sitting there, and it pushes underneath your concrete wall and into your basement. So if you have an older house, you're going to be in a basement. Let's say you've got cinder block, and the bottom 2 rows of the cinder block are always darker than the rest of the wall. It's because there's water sitting outside of that stacked up against your house. The very bottom corner where the concrete wall and the floor come together, sometimes you'll even get puddles, right? Because they pour the footing and then they pour the wall, and the water comes right through that crack under the hydrostatic pressure. It's a big issue. If you're on a slab foundation, all of our friends in the south, cheers to all of you, you're on a slab foundation. You want to make sure that you manage water there as well, because if you have too flat of a surface and the water gets under the slab, it'll start to erode away at the sand underneath your slab, and then you lose your structure, and then you're going to get cracks in your floor, and that'll translate through all the tile in your house. Big problem. So make sure you're managing your water. If you need to use a French drain system, use it. If you need to dig a hole in the ground and put a big barrel so that you can have a catch basin to put the water directed to it in heavy rainstorms, use it. But keep the water away from your foundation, okay? Bottom line. Now, in the north, we also have water that's on our roof that comes from snow, and it's a problem. We get ice damming, right? Yeah, raise your hand if you ever got ice damming. Now, in our building code, it's still pretty sad. We have about 3 feet of protection from ice damming, which kind of is the overhang area. And so basically what ice damming is if this is your roof, the snow lands on it, the sun comes and it shines, and the part that's underneath the house, it's nice and warm there, but the exposed overhang of the roof is very cold, okay? And so the snow on the top, where it's insulated, it tends to melt first and not at the bottom. And then it gets wet, and it pools up, and then different times of the year we'll get freeze-thaw cycle. And what the water does is it gets wet and it sits there against the shingle. And then when it freezes at nighttime, it lifts the shingle and it crawls up underneath as it expands, because water expands as it freezes. And then the next day it'll melt again, but now the shingles are separated. Well, so now the water's sitting up underneath the shingle, and it freezes that night and it grows a little bit more. And over the course of a week or so, it'll get right past the shingles, right up to where your OSB has got a seam, and then the next day, drip, 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 it starts working its way into your house. It can be a real problem. Don't underestimate the power of snow and ice damming. I once was called to a friend of mine's house. He had a brand new house, and he's like, I don't know what's going on with my dining room floor. The hardwood's starting to get all warped and cupping, just on one side by a window. I said, well, the only way to find out what's wrong is to open up the wall and follow the water stain. So we did. We opened up the wall, we followed the water stain up and around his windows, up to the ceiling, up through the second floor, right into the attic, and what we found was that there was a mushroom vent on the roof, outside, under the snow, and it was buried, and the water was just coming right through his vent, fall down through the ceiling, right through the cavity. There's a wire drilled in the plate, went through that hole, all the way down the wall, down by the window, and it found a resting place in his dining room. After that, he decided that he was going to keep the snow off of his roof for the rest of his life, because holy cow, really? Snow on the roof could destroy your dining room hardwood? Yep, this happened. So that's ice damming. We don't want it. And in order to protect yourself from that, maybe the next time you get your roof done, don't cheap out on 3 feet of protection. Maybe go 6 or cover the whole darn roof, right? Think about it, because that is very, very, very expensive, and it's not something that most people are going to be able to identify without destroying half their house. If you have an older house, let's still talking rain, because there's all kinds of problems we can have from water, but let's talk more rain. Lots of older houses in the 30s, you're going to love this, they made little subdivisions, and they built these beautiful homes with basements and little windows for the basements right off the driveway. But back in those days, they didn't do window wells. They didn't do any protection. They just had house driveway with windows right on it. And so when the winter comes, the snow builds up and it rains, and then the ice and snow melts, that water goes right underneath the windowsill, travels through underneath the windowsill, and then right down the inside of the foundation wall. The beautiful part about these kinds of problems are, the only way to keep that from happening is to maintain the caulking on the outside of that window that's invisible, because it's underneath, about 2 inches off the ground. No one's ever looking there. But the best news about that is insurance doesn't cover that. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, insurance generally does not cover water infiltration through a window. So, little anecdote, I had somebody, they renovated a house in 1930 down by a hospital here in Ottawa. It's a beautiful neighborhood, right? Beautiful renovation. And they made the big mistake of putting in a laminate floor throughout the whole basement. And then they put in built-in cabinets and TVs and shelves and books and everything all over the place. And then they had problems with the rain. And the rain came and the rain came and it kept coming through that window, but they didn't see it because it was behind the wall. And so what happened is we got a call one day, and this guy had just finished his basement. They just finished moving in and setting everything up. And now his laminate floor was soaking wet and warped and cupping and sticking all over the place. He's like, where's this water coming from? And we were able to trace it back to coming from under the window, and his whole basement was destroyed. And he had no insurance coverage for that. Yep, that sucked. So, lesson number 1, if you're gonna do a basement, the way you protect yourself from that is right here. Put in a subfloor system. Because even if water comes through the window and goes down the wall, it goes under the subfloor, and it's soaking wet, okay? A proper basement system like this shares the airspace with all of these cavities. Goes up behind your insulation through an airspace, makes contact with your floor joist cavity, which can transfer that moisture outside. Now, this might take a few weeks to dry out, but your entire investment is protected, and you're on the warm, dry side of the subfloor, okay? That's why we build it, because we're expecting water to get in behind. We don't go through all these expensive processes because we don't think we're gonna have a problem. We know we're gonna have a problem, and this protects you from most of them. Okay, so here's a story. We had a rainstorm here in Ottawa a few years back, and it was torrential. We got 100 millimeters of rain, and it was just absolutely overwhelmed all of our sewage systems, because the city collection of rainwater off the street shared with our sewer system as a backup. And when that got overwhelmed, guess what that sewer system shares? That's right, the lateral pipe coming to the house. So everybody who had a home who didn't have a backflow preventer valve got sewage and rainwater all filled up in their basement. God bless them. And that was a problem. And then it happened again, and then it happened again. And so our city actually had to go around and start installing these backwater preventer valves. Toilet, you take your shower, it all goes to the city. But if the water comes from the city, it's off from coming into your house. All right, that's all it is, nice and simple. You can get the same kind of a problem when the city's doing maintenance, right? Another story, we're working at a house. One day the city came by and they were cleaning out some of their lines. Isn't that nice? High pressure water hose, lovely, it got blocked. And guess what happened? It diverted right into my customer's basement. Yep, I had nothing to do with that problem, but man, I was there to witness it. I could not believe my eyes that they would use 5,000 PSI in the septic line, not knowing that the thing was blocked. Blew all of the sewage into this guy's basement. He was a real happy customer. Again, that one little backflow preventer valve would have saved his bacon, but they didn't start using them in new houses and new house construction until somewhere in the mid-90s. Okay, so if you have an older house, make sure you've got one installed in your house, all right? And if you don't, get one, because a majority of all of the sewage problems and major rainstorm problems that are gonna put water in your basement come from the lack of that valve being present. Remember, you don't have to outrun the bear, just the guy next to you. Same with the basement. You don't have to, if you have this valve, the whole rest of the neighborhood can fill up with the basement water, but if you got the valve, you won't, all right? Same situation. Now, that deals with water rain, that deals with water coming around the house, that deals with septic and sewage. Where else can you have a water problem? Well, that's real easy. A lot of people have got electric hot water tanks, okay? Now, I'm gonna make this suggestion. If you're finishing your basement, use a system like this with a subfloor, because you put this throughout all the finished space, and in the mechanical room where you have your hot water tank, you don't put a subfloor. You put that hot water tank right on the concrete, and here's why. Inside the hot water tank, there's something called an anode rod, okay? And it's a fancy little chemistry situation going on where it's got a certain kind of material in there, depending on if you're on city water or country water, and it attracts everything that would corrode the steel bucket that is a hot water tank. And it attracts it and tracks it and tracks it, and it eats up the rod. Most people forget to ever do an inspection on the rod or change it out. And as a result, the rod is gone after a few years, and then the tank gets attacked. And it, almost inevitably what happens is you go on vacation, and then your tank explodes because it rusted out from the inside. Now, you come back from vacation and you're trying to figure out why there's 4 feet of water in the basement. It's because there is a shutoff valve on a hot water tank. And might I suggest the next time you go on vacation, turn that water valve off, so if your tank explodes, it won't fill your whole basement with water. You're just gonna drop 40 gallons. 40 or 50 gallons of water in a basement with a subfloor system looks a lot like this when you come home. Not a big deal. Remember, almost every house has got a drain in the floor somewhere, all right? And it's not a code that says it has to be the lowest part of the basement. So having a subfloor system gives you that little bit of protection to keep everything nice and dry. So before we talk about all the different water problems you can have from your plumbing in your house, let's talk about one more issue, and that is caulking. And I'm going through this because I want you to understand, guys, you need to think about your home's, the systems of your home. It's a water diversion system for the most part, not waterproofing, okay? And so if your water diversion isn't working, there's no backup to it. Had a customer, called me up, had a brand new kitchen renovation, had a unique house. They had a second story and they had a door that walked out onto like a patio rooftop flat area above the kitchen. And it didn't have a railing, it didn't have a function. It was just there because they built the kitchen in the house strange. Strange houses have their own strange, unique problems, and here's what they got. So the contractor did a decent job on most of the work, but lo and behold, the door that goes onto that patio was sitting on top of what we would call a ridge beam, a 2x10 engineered laminated beam, and then the door goes on top of that. And when you waterproof on the outside of a house for a situation like that in a 4-season climate, you generally want to bring the flashing right up to the door. Well, they cheated and they only brought it up about 6 inches, which isn't the end of the world. But that flashing needed to be sealed to the house, right? And they didn't. They did the caulking, got an air bubble, and just kept on trucking. How many times I've seen that? Let me demonstrate what I'm talking about. Here. So you're caulking away, and in the tube, you get an air bubble. And now you're over here. Well, it's Friday, it's 3 o'clock, you're done, you're tired, you want to go home, and you leave that much space uncaulked. You leave an inch without caulking. Well, if that's the only protection you've got for your house against water, guess what? You're screwed. Here's what happened. Over the course of a few months, it rained and rained and rained and rained and rained, and the water kept on going in this little gap, okay? The wood that was underneath that gap would swell, and now the metal was pulling off the wall. So now that gap was getting more and more pronounced. But because no one ever used that door, no one ever went out on that patio, no one ever saw the problem. I get the phone call one day, hey, got a friend of mine who worked in this neighborhood, I need a second opinion. Can you come take a look at my kitchen? I pop by the kitchen, and he's got a beautiful kitchen, pot lights, and the one pot light specifically had stains all around it, and there was water dripping through the pot light. He's like, what causes that? I said, does it drip every day or just after the rain? And he goes, just after rain. I said, well, then you've got a hole somewhere in your building envelope where the water's finding its way in, and it's just finding an exit. The only way for us to find out where the hole is to open up your ceiling and follow the water. So we did. We opened up the ceiling, followed the water, found our way back to that little piece of wood, and guess what? Because the water had been going in there for so long, it's been a little over a year, carpenter ants decided to make a home there too, right? So remember, if you have an old tree in your property and it's kind of like rotting away, ants live in there. And then they send out these little scouts to find other new wonderful places to live. And this one found the wet wood in that rim joist. Now this is a structural piece of lumber, right? It's holding up the second story of a home. Ants don't care if it's wet, they can eat it easy, and so they love it. And so they put a whole colony underneath this guy's door. We pulled off the flashing, and I went, it was powder. Just dust, all right? Unbelievable. He couldn't even believe his mind. So we had to rebuild the structure of this guy's second story beam, and then reinstate all of the kitchen ceiling and everything else because of a caulking bubble. Folks, when you have people working for you and the only thing protecting your home is a caulking, go and inspect it yourself. It's your house and you got to pay the consequences. Okay, so enough doom and gloom, right? These are the disasters that happen from bulk water from outside. There's one more problem you might run into, and that's a crack in your foundation. Now, generally speaking, it's the law in foundations. If there's a crack in the concrete, okay, it's on both sides of the concrete. Concrete doesn't just crack on the outside or just the inside, all right? So if you see one on the inside or on the outside, it's all the way through. You need to get that all cleaned out and get an injection guy in there who can seal that up with some epoxies. And that is not a very big deal, okay? It costs about $500-600 depending on the company. You could even try to do it yourself. There's some stuff available on the market, but get these things fixed. And the way you want to look for them is around windows, okay? It seems to be a weak spot in structure right on the bottom of a corner of a window, and it'll crack open there. All right? Or you can do an inspection around the outside of your house and look at your foundation. If the foundation cracked, then the parging, the little thin piece of decorative concrete they put on top, it cracks too. Now, if the parging is cracked, it may not be because of a foundation crack. It could just be you had a lousy parging installer, right? Most guys cut the corners and don't cover parging when they install it, so it dries out and cracks. So if you see a crack in your parging, take a hammer, chip off a little bit more, and inspect if it's in your foundation. And if you see the crack in the foundation, trust me, it's all the way through, and you got water coming in your house. So that covers the majority of the issues that you're going to be dealing with, okay, for water getting in the house. The only other thing I can say is there are a lot of times when people will renovate doors and windows and they won't integrate the house wrap and tape it to flashing to go and divert water from behind the siding out of the window. And so if the water gets trapped inside the window, it'll go inside and outside. And then you'll have water coming through the trim work around the inside of your window, and that's maddening. But let's talk about the plumbing as it pertains to inside the house. And if you've got an experience and you want to share it so the world can hear your story and protect themselves from another issue, feel free to jump in the comments section and tell us about it. But now we're going to talk about plumbing and all the different issues that I've seen in my career and what you need to do to protect yourself. I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm just going to go through like my top 5 or 6 list of different plumbing problems that I've seen in my career. 1, mini splits, okay? Lots of people use a mini split to provide air conditioning or heating systems in their home for additions or areas that are serviced really poorly by their furnaces. I get it, right? And so they all have one thing in common. In order to do air conditioning, you've got to have drainage because it takes water out of the air. In a lot of home renovations, if you get a mini split on the second or third floor of a house, they'll put it on an interior wall and then they'll run a drain somewhere else leading to the outside, or they might tie it into the DWV system of the home. That's the drain waste vent system. And if they do that, you're gonna love this next story. I was working for a company, we got a warranty call, just finished the renovation, the house is gorgeous and the ceiling is soaking wet and they're trying to figure out what the heck is going on. We went to the home and we inspected and we looked at the deck, and they had a waterproofing system there. No, that wasn't the issue. We had to open the ceiling, we were following the water. Guess what we found out? Again, probably a Friday afternoon, and the plumber was a little bit late that day. He had a lot of things going on, and they cut a corner. So they had a mini split set up in the 3rd story attic, and the pipe to run it and tie into the existing plumbing system had to run almost 20-something feet. And so that means 2 pieces of pipe and a coupling. And this genius decided not to use all-around strapping to hold the pipe. And it was almost perfectly horizontal, which means 25 feet, 1.5 inches carries a whole lot of water. And what that water does is it sags. And he didn't even bother to glue the joint. He's thinking, it's just a condensation line, no big deal. What happened is he ended up with about 100 pounds of water in there, and it just broke. Went into the ceiling, saturated everything. And then for the next couple of weeks, it just kept raining through the ceiling. Right? Crazy. So, if you're going to be running plumbing lines like that, you've got to support them, okay? ABS pipe, especially ABS, even when you use the solvent, it doesn't hold together very well. You can still break that joint with a decent amount of force. So make sure you use all around to support everywhere that you're gonna have joints in ABS plumbing if it's gonna have the potential to back up and fill up with water, all right? That's just a really good piece of advice. Next, and not to forget about everybody with really old homes, if you have an old cast plumbing house, think of it this way. The old cast plumbing, it's fixed, it's not going anywhere. Remember the old cartoon, the house burns down and the pipe and the tub are just sitting there? That's because that's how strong that stuff is. It doesn't move, but old houses move. Because they don't have modern structure. They don't have steel brackets. They just use nails, and so everything sinks. And as the house moves, the seal on the toilet and then the toilet with the lead to the cast pipe, it can crack, all right? And so then you can start developing drips and leaks from places you just don't want leaking. So consider this. If you've got an old toilet in an old cast house, change the cast out. Or you can go to the store and buy a piece of epoxy tubing. It's like Play-Doh. And you can break it open and rub it around, and you can reseal all the old broken seals on the lead to cast pipe. All right, it'll make it work like brand new. Are there areas where we have water problems? Well, let's face it, all of our water supply systems have got a lifespan, right? If it's copper or if it's steel, back in the old days, right? Everything will fail over time. So, copper has a few different issues. 3 of them I think we're going to cover today. One is pinholes. Yeah, copper can develop a pinhole. All right? It's just caused by turbulence in the line. So make sure that when you're doing your copper, you clean your burrs, right? Because the way the water moves, you can actually get a dry spot in a pressurized water line, and it'll end up corroding, and all kinds of things happen. You get a pinhole and it springs a leak. And if it happens in a wall, well, that's hellish, because that just starts to get everything really wet and it's slow drip. And by the time you find out you got a water problem, sometimes it could be months later and everything's gone to mold. That's a bad issue. Another water issue you have is if you're renovating, you start tearing things apart, and you'll find that somebody had a copper pipe and they put it into a fitting and they were just a little short. Just a little short. So what did they do? They took solder and they layered it up like crazy. And it works fine until one day somebody is just jiggling drywall off the wall. Happened to me, and that joint just blew up. See, he didn't solder that joint, he welded it. And that's not how we use solder, okay? Don't be that guy. If the pipe's not long enough, go buy more pipe, all right? Almost everything bad that happens in a house happens at the end of the day when people are in a hurry to leave. Now, the other issues we have with supply lines generally is the shutoff valves. Up until, I'm going to say the last 15 years, almost every shutoff valve I've ever seen, toilets, sinks, laundry, they're all like with gaskets, and you turn them and turn them and turn them and turn them and turn them off. They've got that little tin handle on it, and if it gets old, it gets rusty and it can slice your fingers open. It's nasty, right? Be careful with those because they've got 2 gaskets. One of them is designed to shut off the water and keep it running through the pipe in the closed position. And one of them is when it's open, it seals off water from getting out where the handle goes, all right? But when it's open for a long period of time, like most toilets, and then you go to close it, the other gasket's dried out and it's not gonna work, and it'll leak and leak and leak. So if you're doing a renovation and you think you're gonna tear everything out of the bathroom and just shut that shut-off valve and you're fine, think again. Go to the store, get yourself a 3/8 cap and some plumbing paste, run up the cap and then screw it on the lid, because that is gonna leak overnight. And if you go away on the weekend or you're not paying attention, you're gonna end up with a flood in your bathroom coming through your ceiling. And it's all because the shutoff valve gasket needs to be replaced. And if you don't know this, that 3 cents, that can cause you thousands of dollars of damage. Now, here's another piece of advice. If you're renovating your house, turn the water off. Even take the pressure out of the lines, okay? Don't be that guy. Because plumbing is usually pressurized at around, what is it, 55, 65 PSI? That doesn't mean anything to you. What it means is, this is a 5-gallon pail. And most cities pressurize their water so it can fill a 5-gallon pail in 1 minute. That's 60 seconds. Now, can you imagine having a leak in your house that you don't even know about, that's putting this much water in your home every 60 seconds? And yet it happens every year. And here's where it happens. Hose bibs. Everybody who has a basement who has a hose bib, pay attention. Hose bibs are phenomenally, how should we say, they're infamous. Hose bibs are infamous for this problem. It's not the hose bib that's the problem, it's the installer. A lot of different issues going on there. But a hose bib is a great big long piece of steel and a handle on the outside, and it's a long thread with a gasket on it again. And when you close it, it closes the water off, okay? But if it's on an angle, it's still full of water. And when the water freezes, it expands and blows the hose bib open, which is inside the house. Isn't that nice? And in the springtime, people all over the country went out this spring. I wonder how many claims, tens of thousands probably. People who opened up their hose for the first time in a new house, or they did a little modification, or the tape that somebody put on that hose bib to keep the insulation stuffed in there so that the gasket part stayed warm, finally gave out and the insulation relaxed. Wait a minute, but then it's insulated. So then, oh, you're on the wrong side of the insulation now, kids. So then it froze anyway. You open it up, you're gonna go wash your bike or something. Next thing you know, you're washing your bike, you're out there 20 minutes, half an hour, 30 of these have dumped into your basement. Isn't that exciting? So then you come inside and you're like walking through your carpet and you're leaving wet footprints and you're like, what's going on? That's what's going on. Somebody did an incorrect installation on the hose bib, you blew your line and you weren't even aware of it. So the way you protect yourself from that is when you go to open your line in the spring, make sure someone's in the house who can hear psst. If you hear that sound, shut off the damn hose, quick. All right, open up your ceiling, grab one of those trap doors, have a look, see what's going on, because you could be the victim of a poor installation. The next issue we've got is water supply lines. Guys, there's a lot of people renovating and they're using PEX nowadays. And I love PEX, there's nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of different systems. I'm not gonna get into which one's best, but there are 2 major DIY crimp systems. You can see here, this one is a stainless steel ring. It's not a continuous ring. It's wrapped around, there's bumps and holes on it and it catches over and the tool pinches and creates compression. And that's nice if it's done right. But if that pinch isn't really done well, these have a really high rate of failure within the first few weeks, okay? The first few weeks. Now here's the problem with the few weeks. If you've done your plumbing and you've tested it and it doesn't leak and you think you're good to go, the next thing you do is you close the wall. So now the high rate of failure in a few weeks is going to happen once you've closed your walls, right? So now it's leaking and you don't see it. That means the water is hitting the plate. That means you've got issues going on. It's going through the wall underneath or the ceiling underneath, and it's destroying part of your house before it really shows up, because the house will absorb a lot of moisture before it starts to show up, okay? The better system is the single copper ring. You slide it over and you put it in your little fancy tool here. And what it does is it changes the diameter. Okay, it changes the diameter of the metal. It literally takes all that material and compresses it into a smaller space. If you don't pinch this and you get a surge of pressure, sometimes it's enough to pop the end off or to stretch it and then you get a leak. the amount of pressure that it takes to expand that metal ring to force a leak is going to be something equivalent to 2 dump trucks, you know, going in opposite directions. And it's just ridiculous. So this is like 10 times the strength that you need, where this is maybe 2 times the strength that you need. And because you're pinching, there's variables and there's room there for problems. So if you're going to be doing plumbing, forget everything to do with that and use these, okay? So now we're at that point. We're going to go and talk about the different kinds of problems that you can run into with your water supply lines because they're under pressure. And the folks in Texas will attest to this. A couple years ago, they got a freak storm and their water lines all froze because they didn't know how to provide protection from that storm before it hit. So we're going to give that secret, what they could have done to avoid all of the damage. And we're going to show you what happens if you're working and you cause damage, all right? The different ways that you can solve that on the spot. So let's just jump outside. I got a little display set up. Sometimes when you're renovating, you're going to find that the last homeowner did some creative plumbing, and you're going to have a little surprise. What the? Oh, nuts! Don't panic in these situations. Here's how you fix this. Grab your wrench and compress the copper. Remember, you've got about 60 seconds before you get the first 5 gallons of water into your home. Once you've compressed it, finish cutting it off. Now we're gonna just keep on working that compression. There we go. Now, fold it back over on itself. I really wish I had my square end pliers. But in an emergency, you gotta work with what you got. There, we almost got it. Okay. Now, at this point, the drip is almost stopped, and I could do some more. Or now's a great time, now that you've got it under control, to go find the shutoff valve and give that sucker a turn. So here's a little story. I was once at a 4th-story apartment building, and I was changing somebody's countertops. So I disconnected the water supply lines from the shutoff valves that were on the copper. And they were on with a compression fitting, and the copper fitting blew off. And so the water's firing out. So I had to quit with my hand. And now, I'm not going to suggest you do this. Here's the answer to this problem. If that ever happens to you, be prepared like a Boy Scout. Because remember, we're talking 5 gallons a minute. On the 4th story of a condominium apartment, that's the problem. Have one of these in your pocket. This is the shark bite shutoff. You stick it on here, and then you just turn the valve. Unfortunately, I was stuck there for 50 minutes screaming for help on the hot water line, burning my hand, until the super finally showed up. Not too damn super Canadian of him, because his answer to my scream was, "That's not my problem." To which I answered, "Not mine either," and I walked away. He found the shutoff pretty darn quick after that. The last kind of problem you're going to find is a lot of times when people do copper work and they may be trying to change a fitting or add a line, and they put too much heat for the soldering. And what happens is, yep, you guessed it, you got a pinhole. Now, pinholes can release a lot of water. In situations like this, you're going to want to have one of these bad boys. This alpha tape is actually a siliconized tape. And you know, you got about 1 minute before 5 gallons gets out. The good news is this usually happens in a basement. The way you work this stuff, try not to get the camera soaking wet, you start a couple of inches away, okay? And you really want to stretch this tape. And the white line is on here to tell you where your joint should be. Okay? Really want to stretch it tight. Here we go. We're almost there. Yep. You just keep unwrapping this tape over and over and over again, wherever the leak is, and you pull. The strength is in the tension. You get that down. to just a couple of drips. You can let go. And now you can go find your shutoff valve and a new pair of jeans. So it doesn't really matter if you have an old house or a new house. Plumbing disasters, water disasters, they can find us all. The secret is to be a Boy Scout and be prepared and mitigate as many of these issues as you can before they happen. So let's just recap. If you have problems outside, seal up your house with better waterproofing, not just water diversion. Use French drains around your house if you can't get proper grading. In the basement, use subfloors, right? And try to make sure all of your caulking is up to date and do an annual inspection. As for while you're renovating, the best advice has always been, before you touch anything, just turn off the water. Really, the toilet has another flush in it. Just turn off the water before you start and take the pressure out of the line. And all these kinds of problems that are going to find you will be somebody else's problem. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel and you just witnessed me hosing myself down for your benefit, I think you owe me a subscribe right now. Make sure you share this video with everybody you know, all right? There's a lot of inherent danger in owning a house and a lot of great expense that can come from just simple little mistakes. And you can avoid all that too. Nobody needs to be the victim of a flood. It's totally avoidable almost all the time. Now listen, I had a lot of fun putting this information together for you today, but if you're a victim of a flood and you've got a big disaster in your house and insurance is not covering you, then click the link over here. We did a playlist to help all the folks out in Texas, and all that information is available for you. You can remediate all of your own floods yourself, and this is how you do it safe. Don't let mold take over your house, all right? Stay safe. Cheers.